Hi, thanks for coming out tonight. So you guys have been in school for 2 weeks? Week and a half. Okay. And how many people are radio people? I'm just curious. Okay. And how many people listen to public radio or have listened? Okay. Wow. So as Ann said in that really generous introduction, I've been I was a radio documentary producer for about 20 years before starting this project, StoryCorps, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But I'm going to keep this evening really informal and just kind of play you guys a lot of tape and answer questions if you have questions, and just talk about audio and talk about maybe interviewing if you guys want to talk about that. I think that's it. So I'm gonna start by playing a couple of stories. I'll start by playing a story from many years ago. This was from 20 years ago, 1989, and this is a radio documentary that I did called "Tossing Away the Keys." This is an excerpt of a 30-minute documentary. I think I'm gonna play about 8 minutes from this documentary. And basically, I was interested in doing a story about people who had spent a long time in prison. This documentary takes place at the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola, Louisiana. And Louisiana was the first state to sentence people to natural life sentences. So when you get a life sentence, you have to spend the rest of your life in prison. And I wanted to know what it was like for people who, at this point in '89, had served the longest prison sentences in American history, and also to know what it was like to know that you were going to spend the rest of your life in prison. When I got down to the penitentiary, you're not going to hear his voice, I produced this piece with a guy named Bert Rideau, who is a famous prison journalist who created a magazine called The Angleite down at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. And when I got down to Louisiana, I found out about a group of guys there who were caught in a really insane and unfortunate circumstance. These were men, all African American, who had been accused of committing a crime in the 1960s, 63, 62. And at that time, a life sentence meant 10 years and 5 months, and then everybody was basically released as long as they didn't do anything bad in prison. And these men had been told by their attorneys that they needed to plead guilty to their crime, get a life sentence, not fight the crime and potentially get the death penalty. So these guys had pled guilty to crimes, some of which they hadn't committed, on the assumption that they'd get out 10 years later, 10 years and 6 months later. And when they were in for 10 years and 3 months, or 10 years and 4 months, 10 years and 5 months, in 1973 the law changed. So instead of getting out next month, they were stuck in prison for the rest of their lives. So this is their story, their voices. And again, it's about 8 minutes from a 30-minute documentary called Tossing Away the Keys. And you're going to hear music in this documentary also. The singing is by a gospel group called the Angola Gospel Superiors, which was also made up of lifers at Angola. So that is track 1.
My name is Joe White. My number is 56310. I've been incarcerated for murder here in Angola since 1961. I've been here so long, it's difficult to imagine how it feels to be free. I don't think people can conceive what it means to spend all your life in prison.
My name is Henry L. Patterson. My prison number is 54915. I've been in Angola for 30 years. I'm serving a life sentence for a murder I committed in a barroom fight. Really, I found technology amazing. You know, I find with the, I don't know for sure, but they say they got super highways now, okay? Where you bypass the cities and all this, so you don't have to go slow down and you just straight through. And I never rode on no super highway, you know that, huh? I wouldn't even know how to get on one. I wouldn't even know what to do if I get on one. They say you got lanes that you get in, you say fast, slow, you know what I'm talking about? And all these things here, you say, boy, this is amazing.
If he was to be buried alive, that's what it would be like. Except for the television, we wouldn't know that there's a world out there. Except for the radios, we wouldn't know. We actually come here And when we come here, everything stops. This is a graveyard of time.
I can only relate to that which I came here out of in '61. And when I came here in 1961, the restaurants were segregated. When I caught a bus, I caught the back end of the bus. I had to go to the back. I couldn't sit in the front. You look at the changes, you know, in that time, the period you stop, and they say, well, they're doing this today, they're doing that. You wonder, is it real? You know, that's for real, man?
The living dead is an accurate description of it. Because the things that it takes to live, to feel life, you're not in contact with that. We fantasize. That's all we have left, is our fantasies and our dreams. And this is what a lot of people rely on to make it.
I often picture my son in my mind's eye. The last time I saw him, he was 10 years old. And now he's 35. I often imagine the scene of when James and I face each other the first time. What will I do? Will we move toward each other? Will I be able to hug him? What response will I get from that hug? Will it be a loving hug? This picture runs over and over in my mind. It's like a dream that occurs over and over and over.
It's as if you don't exist. It's like you're in the spirit and everything around you is alive, and you can't touch, you can't reach, you can't do anything but just look. We can't touch people's lives. We can't touch their lives. That's what tears us up. We can't touch their lives.
I don't want to die here and be forgotten. I don't want to spend my last moment on earth here in penitentiary. I would like to see the outside once more. We're trying to hold on to a little faith, but it's constantly deteriorating.
Point Lookout, see, we sometimes call it Boot Hill. There's a place here in Angola where they bury the dead. Old-timers thinks about it a right good deal, but they don't talk about it much because they're afraid that they might get buried out there. See, if you buried out there, you really forgotten. Because nobody comes here to see you. Nobody even passes by Boot Hill.
When you die in Angola, you don't die as Henry Patterson lies here. You die as 54-9 number 5 is in the ground up there. I don't want to die no more. I don't want to die insignificant no more. Nobody. What is that? A prison number? Nah.
When you start to realize that you're never going to leave this place, hopelessness begins to take hold of your time. It's like a disease. Everybody around you have it. And it's just a matter of time before you'll be next. That's the torture. Not giving us hope. People always ask me to recite this particular poem. And the reason I believe it do because it touches something inside of them. It's called Just Thinking. Just thinking, prisoner's song. I want to drift along, sing a song, get high off memories. I want to get to know, just once more, how it feels to be free. I want to rip and run, have a lot of fun, come go as I please. I want to sleep real late, give myself a break, put my mind at ease. I want to go I want to go strange places, meet new faces, make myself at home. I want to reach behind, reclaim what's mine, forget I was ever gone. I want to stretch out my arms, air out my lungs, get out my system, this inhibition. I don't know what I want to do. Tell you the truth, I was just thinking. I sure wish this thing would come to an end.
That when Sound Portraits, our mission at Sound Portraits was to kind of find and celebrate poetry in places you wouldn't expect to hear it, in the words of people you might not expect to hear it from, not literally poetry. The guy at the end of that documentary, Joe White, ended up getting pardoned right after this documentary aired, and moved to California, where he went to school in Oakland for poetry and got a bachelor's degree, and now is trying to survive as a poet. And a number of other people after this documentary aired were actually freed. Some of them weren't. The guy who talks about never seeing his son again, what he would say to his son if he saw him again, he actually did end up seeing his son again. His son was also sent to Angola on a life sentence, and he died before, the gentleman who said that died before he got released. But that's a very simple radio story, and I think speaks to kind of the power of radio, the fact that audio is such an intimate medium, and it's almost like an adrenaline shot right to the heart when you hear a voice and a story truly told. And I think that radio has I like to think about when doing these radio programs, people driving in their cars. Most people listen to radio on their way to work or their way from work. And public radio is kind of, while it has a huge audience, there are a lot of kind of beltway kind of people who listen to this, and it's almost like these guys are sitting in the passenger seat, telling a story to the person who's driving home from work and on the hill or wherever they are. And these, I think, the human voice has the ability to kind of have us walk in the footsteps of someone else, at least just for a moment, and that has the capacity to really kind of build bridges between people. Does anybody have questions about what they just heard, how it was done? Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And actually, Bert Rideau, who, one of the things that I hope you guys think about as you go into this profession is, this was kind of a golden opportunity. This guy, Bert Rideau, ran this magazine. He had a telephone in the prison. He had complete open access to do whatever he wanted to do as a journalist because of the warden who was working at the time. And about a year later, a new warden came on, and Wilbert was taken off the newspaper, the magazine, lost his telephone privileges, and this thing never could have happened. Wilbert actually was, he was, even when I went down there in '89, which is 20 years ago, he was already considered the most rehabilitated prisoner in America, and actually wasn't freed until 2 years ago when he was retried on his crime from 50 years ago and found not guilty of murder and freed. Actually, he's doing great and writing his autobiography. I got married a couple years ago, and he came to my wedding, and it was the first wedding that he'd been to in his life. So that was kind of an amazing experience. One of the great things about doing these pieces and spending a lot of time on them is, and I tend to do pieces about people who I like, which is a privilege. It's a great thing to do. So I get to stay in touch with people and get to see them over the years and see how their lives progress. Other questions about that? Yes. Yeah, I was there for, I think I was there for about 5 days total. And again, I had free reign of the prison. I probably interviewed 10 guys and cut it down to the final 5. I mean, I was a kid, I was 22 years old. I had no idea what I was doing. I was completely terrified. But you just kind of follow your gut and things work out in the end. And that, something that, when I used to come, I've come to Columbia a bunch of years in a row now, and they used to title this talk, How to Talk to Regular People, or How to Get Good Interviews from People, or something like that, which is it isn't rocket science. People say, like, how do you get people to open up to you, and so forth. And the truth is that, to get people to open up, all you have to do is kind of look them in the eyes and be honestly interested and listen to what they say, and phenomenal things are going to happen. People sometimes ask if it's possible to get this kind of intimacy with, a camera. And I think that if you're a print reporter and you just have a notebook or no notebook and you're an asshole, you're going to get a much worse interview than you would if you had like Klieg lights and a big 35mm camera and you were actually curious and interested in what people were saying. So I think one of the tricks in journalism in general, in doing interviews, is to be open, to be curious, and also always to be honest. Always to be honest with the people that you're interviewing. If you promise something, if you're a print journalist and you promise to send a clip, send them a clip. And if you follow those kind of few simple rules of just being a normal human being, you will get far in your profession and do great stories. Any other questions about that piece before I go on? Yes. Yeah, I mean, I picked the out of those 10 people, I picked the 5 people who were the most articulate. What I tried to do when I was making radio documentaries is kind of be the vehicle through which people can tell their stories. It's almost like working with them and editing the tape, so that you're presenting kind of you're distilling their words almost to poetry, and yeah, they were absolutely the most interesting and the most articulate of the people that I interviewed there. Did you not use narration in any part of the documentary? It was narrated, and it was narrated by Wilbert, by the guy who was the editor of the magazine. Just not in the clips we heard. One more question, right there. Well, I got access because Wilbert got me access, because he had free reign in the penitentiary as a journalist to move people around, to go to different units on the penitentiary. He actually set me up in a quiet room and let me do these interviews. So basically, the way the interviews go is you do the interviews in a quiet room, and then you add. It's similar to how you do any other radio piece. You add music later or sound effects later. Not sound effects, the real sound of prison doors closing or whatever it was. So Wilbert helped me get access to these folks. Again, a year later, it never would have happened. Preparation, always, before you do an interview, always prepare. Again, I was an idiot kid back then. I mean, I think I prepared the best I could. I didn't know what was coming in the interviews, and I think every night I would listen to what happened and kind of start figuring out where I thought the story might go and reframe my questions for the next day. But the trick, I don't think I've ever done an interview where I didn't bring questions in with me. But when you're doing an interview, I use them as kind of a crutch, and I know what 1 or 2 questions I need to ask, but otherwise you just kind of listen to what people are saying and follow the train of the conversation, and throw out the questions if you need to throw them out. I'm going to play another piece, another prison piece to cheer everybody up tonight. This is a particularly fun one. It's called "Witness to an Execution," and this was done. 4 years ago in Texas. In 2000, 8 years ago, Jesus Christ. In Texas, in 2000, they executed more inmates, more prisoners, more men than any state had executed since the early 19th century, and it was half the executions in the country that year. It was 40 executions. And I was interested in finding out what happened in the death chamber in Huntsville, Texas, where these executions took place by lethal injection. As far as we knew at that time, there were no photographs, no documentary evidence of any kind of an execution since 1929, when a Daily News photographer famously sat in Sing Sing on the execution of a woman named Ruth Snyder, and lifted his pant leg. He had a camera strapped to his ankle and took that famous blurry picture of Ruth Snyder as she was being executed. But since then, there was nothing. And obviously, cameras are not allowed in the execution chamber, tape recorders. But I wanted to find out what happens in the execution chamber between 6:30 and 6:40, almost every week in Texas. What happened, and also the impact on the people who work for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice who carry out these executions. There's a group of men and women who are responsible for these executions every week. And there are also reporters who, there are 2 seats for reporters, 3 seats for reporters at every execution in Texas. And 2 of those seats are held by the local newspaper and by the AP. So there were a couple of reporters who had witnessed many executions. I wanted to see what kind of impact it had on them. This was also narrated. I think you'll hear a little bit of narration. It was narrated by the warden at the Walls Unit, as it's called, Jim Willett. And I think you'll hear him for a second, and then it's going to fade down. And again, that was a moment of opportunity, which maybe I'll talk about after this documentary is done. But this is, again, 8 minutes from a 30-minute documentary, Witness to an Execution, talking about what happens in the execution chamber and what impact it has on the people who are carrying out the executions and watching the executions. And that's track 2.
My name is Jim Brazel. I am a chaplain with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Part of my responsibility is being in the death chamber. At the time of execution, I have been with 114 people at the time of their execution.
My name is Kenneth Dean. I'm the major at the Huntsville unit. I've participated in and witnessed approximately 120 executions.
I'm Michael Grachik, and I'm the correspondent in charge of the Houston Bureau of the Associated Press. I've witnessed approximately 170 executions.
I have been a participant in 31 executions.
I witnessed 52 executions.
Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 115 executions.
Approximately 105, 110 executions.
36 or 37 executions.
130 executions.
I've witnessed 162 executions by lethal injection in the state of Texas.
I'm Jim Willett. I've overseen about 75 executions at the Walls Unit in Huntsville, Texas. I started as a guard here 29 years ago.
Each supervisor is assigned a different portion. Like we have a head person, a right arm, left leg, left leg. And the right leg man will tell him, I need you to hop up on the gurney, lay your head on this end, put your feet on this end. Simultaneously, while he's laying down, the straps are being put across him.
I'm Captain Terry Green. I'm a member of the tie-down team in the execution process. What I do, I will strap the offender's left wrist. And then there are 2 belts, one that comes across the top of his left shoulder, and then another goes right straight across his abdominal area.
Some of them are very calm, some of them are upset, some of them are crying.
Some of them been sweating, some of them will have the smell of anxiety, if you will, of fear.
Usually within about 20 seconds, he's completely strapped down, 20 to 30 seconds. I mean, it's down to a fine art.
There's basically a situation where we just make sure he's secure, that he won't be jumping up, that he won't be able to squirm out of the restraints themselves, and that the job can be done, the job being the execution itself.
After all the straps are done, they will look at you and they'll say, thank you. And here you've just strapped a man to the table, and they look at you in the eye and they tell you thank you for everything that you've done. And, you know, that's kind of a weird feeling.
At 6:12, the executioner, a member of my staff whose identity is kept secret, begins to administer the chemicals. This is Public Relations Officer Larry Fitzgerald again.
Texas does not use a machine. Some states use actual injection machine. We use a syringe that is administered through an IV tube from another room.
This is Chaplain Brazel again. The first chemical that's used is a drug called sodium pentothal. Okay, and sodium pentothal is the same chemical that they use on you whenever you're going to have surgery, and it works very quick.
I know that at times they know when it's happening to them. One in particular I can remember, he said, "I can taste it."
Had one man who wanted to sing Silent Night. He made his final statement, and then after the warden gave the signal, he started singing Silent Night. And he got to the part, "Round to yon virgin mother and child." And just as he got child out was the last word.
The people inside the room watching it are invariably silent. Sometimes you find people holding hands, maybe a mother and father of a murder victim or friends of the condemned man.
It's very quiet. It's extremely quiet. You can hear every breath everyone takes around you. You can hear the cries, the weeping, the praying.
The second chemical is pancremonium bromide, which is a muscle relaxant. It causes the diaphragm and the lungs to collapse.
It's usually a real deep breath. Just seems like they draw in all the air they can.
And then whenever that breath goes, it's like a snore. I mean, it's like kind of like taking a balloon and squishing that balloon, and the sound that a balloon makes when you're squishing the air out of it.
Generally there's some erratic movement on the part of the inmate, some coughing, sputtering, and occasionally a gasp. Then there's quiet.
I've had several of them where watching their last breath go from their bodies and their eyes never take unfixed from mine. You know, I mean, just actually locked together. And I can close my eyes now and see those eyes. My feelings and my emotions are extremely intense at that time. I've never really been able to describe it, and I guess in a way I'm kind of afraid to describe it. I've never really delved into that part of my feelings yet.
The third chemical actually stops the heart.
At that point, and it's just something out of tradition, and I certainly haven't messed with it because it's worked. I was told to wait 3 minutes from that point, and I have kept it to a T on 3 minutes.
You see no more breathing, you hear no more sounds, it's just waiting.
I had a mother collapse right in front of me. We were standing virtually shoulder to shoulder. She collapsed, hit the floor, went into hyperventilation and almost convulsions.
I've seen family members collapse in there. I've seen them scream and wail. I've seen them beat the glass.
I've seen them fall into the floor, totally lose control. And yet, how do you tell a mother that she can't be there in the last moments of her son's life?
You'll never hear another sound like a mother wailing whenever she's watching her son be executed. There's no other sound like it. It is just this horrendous wail. You can't get away from it. That wail surrounds the room. It's definitely something you won't ever forget.
My name is Reverend Carol Pickett. I'm a Presbyterian minister. I'm retired from the Walls Unit, where I was chaplain for the death house, and I walked with and stood by and witnessed the execution of 95 inmates from the first one that was done in 1982 until the end of August 1995. In the beginning days of the executions in Texas, we were faced with something that nobody had ever done before. Nobody had ever been executed by lethal injection. It was a brand new concept of humane execution, and we were to do the very first one. It was almost a new world. In the beginning, everybody was a name, but as it got on, they just started, doing it bam, bam, bam. You do 3 a year is one thing. Do 35 a year, that's a lot. I've had guards, lots of guards quit. Even those tough guards you talk about, a lot of those quit. Some of them couldn't take it. Some of them couldn't take it. After they're strapped down and the needles are flowing, you got probably 45 seconds where you and he are together for the last time, and nobody can hear what goes on there. And the conversation that took place in there were, basically indescribable. It was always something different. The guy would say, "I want you to pray this prayer." One of them would say, "I just want to tell you thank you One would say, don't forget to mail my letters. Another would say, just tell me again, is it going to hurt? One would say, what do I say when I see God? You got 45 seconds, and you're trying to tell a guy what to say to God.
So on the window of opportunity front, there was the guy whose voice you heard, Jim Willett, who was a warden at the Walls unit, had the courage to, let us in to do this documentary and then to narrate it. Back to the whole honesty thing, I think I flew down with the person I was producing this with to Texas 4 or 5 times after this was recorded but before it was broadcast to talk to Jim and make sure that he knew that he was probably going to be fired after this thing aired. He ends the documentary talking about how he sometimes is watching the chemicals drip down into the veins of the inmates and thinking, what the hell am I doing? Something like that. And he was, I wanted to make sure we did our due diligence, that he fully understood the implications of what he was doing. He resigned shortly after this documentary was broadcast. And the new warden at the Walls unit doesn't let any journalists in, period, at all, to do anything, not to talk to staff, not to actually set foot inside the Walls unit. So again, when you see a window of opportunity for a story, big or small, don't wait. Jump right into that cold, kind of scary pool and do it, because those opportunities can dry up. Any questions about that piece? Yes. These documentaries all aired on All Things Considered on NPR, which is the afternoon news program. Yes.
I was just wondering how you actually got the window of opportunity to get prisoners.
Just asked. Just asked. Yeah. I mean, the way the story came to be is that. I used to do the back page once in a while of the Times Sunday Magazine, like oral histories for them. And actually this was for they do this obituary issue called The Lives They Lived. And I was interested I was interested in that year in particular in executions and the death penalty and what was happening in Texas. So I'd gone down to Texas to have someone who was about to be executed write their own obituary. And as I was working on that, the guy who was taking me around was a guy named Larry Fitzgerald, whose voice is in that piece, who was the public information officer for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And when I was doing the interview with this guy, I saw Larry get a phone call. He must have had a cell phone even back then in the olden days. And I saw his face fall, and I asked him, what's going on, what happened? And he said he had just gotten a call that someone who he had grown very close to on death row had their date set and was about to be executed. And I could see that he was like, and this was a tough Texas guy, and I could see he was totally devastated. So I started thinking about what the impact was on the people who carry out these executions. And then, got permission by just kind of being dogged and not giving up and, making 1 phone call a day or whatever it takes, 5 phone calls a day, 10 phone calls a day, not taking no for an answer. Although at times, there's nothing you can do. I mean, I saw there was a possibility to get in, so we did. Any other questions about that piece? Yeah. No. I mean, I think the people the people who worked, the security staff was thrilled to be asked. I mean, I think these were guys who got paid, I think, $20,000 a year back then, and knew that they were considered by many people in the country to be kind of these evil people, and were thrilled to be able to tell their stories. I think everybody talked. People who were pro-death penalty, against the death penalty, and I know that people were really pleased to feel like their story had been told fairly and honestly, and in their own words. Yes.
How did most of these people, I don't know if you asked, but how did most of them feel about the death penalty? Were they pro? Were they
I didn't really go into that. I think some people, there were, in the documentary, there's a guy who ended up having a mental breakdown after doing kind of one execution too many, and was very deeply scarred by what he'd been through, and he was certainly against the death penalty. That the chaplain who you heard at the end was against the death penalty. Some, there were people who, I just didn't get into it. I got the sense that some people were in favor, some people weren't, but they all felt that this was their job and it was what they were, required to do, and they were going to do it. One more question, yeah.
Did you know that you were making a documentary for NPR?
Yes.
And then if you had to do it all over again, it was going to run on conservative talk radio, would you?
Sure. Nope. Yeah, no, I mean, I've never worked at NPR. I've always had kind of my own company that did documentaries for NPR, but this stuff has always been broadcast on public radio. Public radio is great. It's got a huge audience. Morning Edition now, which is their morning show, is the number two highest rated show in the country after Rush Limbaugh, and catching up quickly. So you have a huge audience. You have 13 million people in the morning. I think 11 million people in the afternoon. So that's a good hit with kind of getting stories out there. And other, the public radio does it less often now on those news shows. Certainly there's fantastic shows like This American Life, but there aren't many opportunities anywhere else but on public radio to do kind of longer form pieces. I'm going to go play the next story. This is this is a story from 15 years ago, and it's kind of what led to StoryCorps, which I'll be talking about after that, and talked about these sort of radio diary or personal radio pieces. And this is the first one that was nationally broadcast. It's called Ghetto Life 101. And in 1993, I gave two kids who were growing up in the Ida B. Wells projects in Chicago, which don't exist now, actually don't exist as of a couple days ago. The last of the Ida B. Wells were torn down. But at the time, it was one of the most deeply disadvantaged communities in the country, a very dangerous place to be growing up. So I gave these two kids, both were 13 years old at the time, tape recorders. And their assignment was to record a week in their lives, to interview everybody they knew, to take their tape recorder to school. And, especially it turned out to interview family members about their lives. And we put this together. The kids named it Ghetto Life 101. I'm going to play about 10 minutes of this program, which was, again, 25 or 30 minutes when it was broadcast. Two kids are named Lee Allen Jones and Lloyd Newman, and their documentary is called Ghetto Life 101, and that's track 3.
Good morning, day 1. Walking to school, leaving out the door. This is my dog, Ferocious. You know why he got that name if you hear him bark. I see the ghetto every day, walking to school. Guys standing on the corner, burning a fire. Be here summertime, wintertime, spring, fall, every day. The drink in the hand, probably some white port, Willie P, Jack Daniels, E&J. I live here. This is home. What's up, Harry? What's up, Doodoo? This is my walk every day, so take me on a little journey through my life. Here's my life. Yeah. My grandmother moved into this house in 1937. Her name is June Marie Jones. I interviewed her in her room. This is still day 2. It's 12:06. Hello?
Hello.
What are we going to talk about tonight?
We're going to talk about the neighborhood.
How it changed and everything.
Yeah.
How do you think it's changed?
For the worse. When we first came in the area, there were no projects. They were all homes. And at one time, we had nice hotels where different movie stars would come in and stay.
When did you start seeing a major change in the neighborhood?
It wasn't all of a sudden. It happened gradually. Day by day, year by year, you could see the change when people would move out, or maybe the original owner would pass and their family didn't want the buildings, and they would just go down.
My grandma raised 8 kids in this house. Her 2 oldest boys died. Now she has 6 kids.
I have 3 boys and 3 girls. They all spoiled rotten. And so are the grandchildren, and especially you.
Get you. What type of child was I when I was a whining child?
No. You was a nice little red-headed boy with blue eyes.
I had blue eyes or brown eyes.
They're blue. They was lighter when you were young. And your hair was lighter, and it would turn white in the summer and darker in the fall.
Well, how was our name?
You got your name from your 2 oldest uncles. The oldest boy's name was Alan, and the second boy under Judy's name was Eric Lee, and your mother made the 2 names, your name out of the 2 names.
I can't name me no common name. Why my name had to be sentimental?
Because you're different. Your name is different and you're different.
My name is Lee Allen, Marvin Jones, and
she gave you the Marvin.
For Marvin Gaye.
For Marvin Gaye, because she liked to hear him sing.
My name's sentimental.
Yeah, your name is special, and you're a special person, too.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Lloyd's house is kind of messed up. There's a lot of roaches creeping around. The toilets have been stopped up off and on for years. The place is always noisy. Lloyd's mother died 2 years ago from drinking. His father is also an alcoholic.
I asked my father, Chill, what his best memories of my mother are.
Man, I have fun putting our feet in the water together. And we're sober then. Once you start getting high, the memories gone. They're gone.
Why are you drinking?
I don't understand why I'm drinking.
Do you think you're going to stop?
Yeah, I'm going in rehab and take care of myself.
What do you drink?
I drink about 2 or 3 pints of wine a day. But it ain't helping me, it ain't doing but killing me. Do people understand it's destroying you?
If it's destroying you, why do you still drink it then?
That's why I got to go in the rehab program next week, because I don't want to destroy my family, because I want my family.
Do you think you've been a good father?
Yes, I have, to the best capability I could.
I have no further questions. Living around here, you hear shooting all the time.
Like Vietnam, sometimes you might hear booga 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 booga, silent booga booga. I remember one time I was over my auntie's house spending the night. We playing Super Nintendo. I hear this lady out, I heard you been looking for me, nigga. And then she just boom, 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 boom. She let off about 8 shots. Then I heard the other gun fire off. And we were just still there playing her, like nothing had happened. And then in Vietnam, some people came back crazy. I don't live in Vietnam, so what you think I'm gonna be if I live it and they just went and visited? Living around here, man, it's depressing. Man, it's depressing. It's not a normal childhood by any means.
We're back at Liala's house.
Sister back here asleep in her room. Can I interview you? Come on. Janelle, tell me about yourself.
Well, I'm very energetic. I like to have a lot of fun.
I like to drink a lot.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do. You smoke marijuana?
No, I don't.
Yes, you do. Tell the truth.
No, I don't.
You're 17.
Yes.
Have a child?
Yes.
How old were you when you had this child?
15.
Let me see. How many close friends of yours have got killed through the years?
I don't know. I can't count all of them. It's been a lot, though.
You think it's around 50?
I don't think it's that many.
Or it's around 30 or 40?
Probably somewhere in that area, maybe a little less than 30.
Do you know who killed or murdered these people?
I know who killed someone.
Like who?
Like Vail.
Who killed him?
No, I ain't gonna tell you who killed Vail.
Who else?
I know who killed Slick.
Who?
I don't want to tell you that either.
Who else?
Cheesy.
Who killed him?
I ain't gonna tell you that either.
Thank you. My grandma sleeps across the hall from my sister, or she keeps an eye on Janelle and the rest of us. She's been through a lot in this house. She spent a lot of years worrying about her children. Now she has to worry about her grandkids. But she's a strong woman. My grandmother says she gets her strength to carry on, her wisdom from the Bible. She loves gospel music, and of all the songs she knows, the one she loves the most is called One Day at a Time. Could you please sing that song for us?
With my voice all messed up.
Do it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Do you remember when you walked among men? Well, Jesus, you know, if you're looking below, it's worse now than then. They're pushing and shoving. They're crowding my mind. Lord, for my sake, teach me to take one day at a time. One day at a time, sweet Jesus. That's all I'm asking of you. So help me today, show me the way, one day at a time. Oh, I'm hoarse. Okay.
She was hoarse, but she still can blow. Thank you. This is Lee Allen Jones and Lloyd Newman. Peace out.
Peace out. Now goodbye. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. See ya.
And where you wanna be.
Peace out. I'm out of here.
Peace out.
Whoa. So that, maybe I'm happy to take a question or two on that piece, and then I want to move on to StoryCorps. Oh, lots of questions. Yes, in the back.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
My name is Summer. I'm a part-timer. My question is, how did you get to know that these two kids have a story to tell? Thank you.
Sure. I was, I got this was actually done for the local public radio station in Chicago, WBEZ. And I had just read Alex Kotlowitz's book called There Are No Children Here. Has anybody here read that? Okay, everybody should read it. It's one of the great classics of 20th century nonfiction. People should read. Have people read like Joseph Mitchell and Up in the Old Hotel and stuff like that? Have you heard of that? Read Up in the Old Hotel also. Alex Kotlowitz did a book where he followed he did a book about two brothers growing up in a project in Chicago called the Henry Horner Projects, and I wanted to do something in spirit, based on that documentary on the radio. I knew we only had a week to do this program, so I sent out faxes. This was before the day of email and letters to every group I could think of. I didn't know if it was going to be, I thought it would be best to have two people participate in this. I didn't know if it would be a brother and sister, a mother and a son, friends. And I've always been based in New York. And I had I asked, people who ran these social service groups or teachers to suggest kids and then had them call me. And there were I talked to a lot of great kids, and again, was very clear with them that I wasn't sure who I was going to pick for this thing and how we were going to do it. And eventually, Lee Allen called me from a payphone, and he just was, that's the kid who's the most talkative of these two. And he was obviously kind of extraordinary. I said, who would you want to do this with? And he said, I'll call you tonight. And he called me from a payphone in the Ida B. Wells with Lloyd that night, and kind of passed the phone back and forth. And within, 30 seconds, they were absolutely making fun of me. And I said, I thought these were the right guys, and then just was in Chicago 2 days later and trained them how to use tape recorders. And again, they followed I trained them for about an hour on how to make recordings. Very simple. What you heard on those recordings were as good as kind of 95% in the 95th percentile of professional reporters at NPR, and the kind of recordings they get. Followed simple rules: wear headphones, keep the microphone one hand's length away from the person that you're talking to. And they did a magnificent job of recording. They did destroy 10 tape recorders over the course of a week. But when they weren't wrecking the tape recorder, what they were getting on these tapes was pretty amazing. And this documentary led, in many ways, was kind of the beginning of thinking about StoryCorps. Who here has heard of StoryCorps? I'm just curious. Okay. And Jonah Engel, who's one of your classmates, was one of the. Were you one of the original facilitators? Second class. StoryCorps is a project that started almost 5 years ago, and in some ways it grew out of Ghetto Life 101. In that, for instance, when you're listening to Lee Allen interview his grandma, I saw giving people tape recorders and giving them the chance to interview a loved one allowed people to ask questions that they'd never asked before, and opened up kind of topics of conversation that continued after the tape recorder was turned off. And then for these kids, when Lee Allen's grandmother died, and almost everybody in that piece who's an adult is dead now, these tapes became enormously valuable to them. And I wanted to figure out a project from that, and a bunch of other things I did. StoryCorps came to be, and it was just kind of a crazy idea to start almost 5 years ago. We opened up a booth in Grand Central Terminal, and basically you bring a loved one to the booth. You're met by a facilitator. Jonah was a facilitator, who talks to you about how to do an oral history. It's very similar. Basically, the first instructions were similar to the kind of instructions I gave Lee Allen and Lloyd. You go into the booth with the facilitator, close the door. You're in this kind of sacred space. The lights are low. You sit across from, say, your grandmother for 40 minutes, look her in the eye, and ask her about her life. At the end of the 40 minutes, 2 CDs have been burned. One goes home with you. The second goes to the Library of Congress, so your great-great-great-great-grandchildren can someday hear your grandmother's voice. And that's basically StoryCorps. It's a very, very simple idea. It was created as kind of a social service, an opportunity to give families a chance to look a loved one in the eye and tell them how much they mean to them just by listening to them. And pretty soon after we launched, we saw that there was interesting content coming out. So now there are 2 sides to StoryCorps. One is giving people access to the StoryCorps experience, and the other is working with the facilitators to select stories that are played on NPR and elsewhere on the web, and hopefully soon everywhere. Stories that, as I said earlier, kind of allow us to walk in the shoes of people we might not have gotten to know, and recognize that our stories, the stories of regular people, the stories of people we find all around us, are as interesting and important as the celebrity bullshit that is thrown at us 24 hours a day everywhere we look and listen. So I'm going to play a few StoryCorps stories, and maybe invite Jonah up to answer questions. I'm gonna start with a story that was recorded very early on at StoryCorps. It's a man named Danny Perasa who came to StoryCorps with his wife Annie. Danny Perasa was an OTB clerk, an off-track betting clerk, and Annie is a nurse, both Brooklyn born and bred. And Danny and Annie came to StoryCorps because they wanted to talk about their love for each other and tell the story of their first date, which had happened 25 years before. So this is Danny and Annie telling the story of their first date at StoryCorps very early on, probably a month after we opened, and that's track 6.
She started to talk, and I said, listen, I'm going to deliver a speech. I said, at the end, you're going to want to go home. I said, you represent a 34-letter word. I said, that word is love. I said, if we're going anywhere, we're going down the aisle because I'm too tired, too sick, and too sore to do any other damn thing. And she turned around, and she said, well, of course I'll marry you. And the next morning, I called her as early as I possibly could.
And he always gets up early.
to make sure she hadn't changed her mind, and she hadn't. And every year on April 22nd around 3 o'clock, I call her and ask her if it was today, would she do it again? And so far the answer's been the same.
Yeah, 25 times yes.
You see, the thing of it is, I always feel guilty when I say I love you to you, and I say it so often. I say it to remind you that as dumpy as I am, it's coming from me. It's like hearing a beautiful song from a busted old radio. And it's nice of you to keep the radio around the house.
If I don't have a note on the kitchen table, I think there's something wrong. You write a love letter to me every morning.
The only thing that could possibly be wrong is I couldn't find a silly pen.
To my princess, the weather out today is extremely rainy. I'll call you at 11:20 in the morning.
It's a romantic weather
and
report.
I love you, I love you, I love you.
When a guy is happily married, no matter what happens at work, no matter what happens in the rest of the day, there's a shelter when you get home. There's a knowledge, knowing that you can hug somebody without them throwing you downstairs and saying, get your hands off me. And being married is like having a color television set. You never want to go back to black and white.
We fell in love with Danny and Annie, I think it's safe to say, fell in love with StoryCorps, and so much personified kind of the core ideas behind StoryCorps, the eloquence and grace and poetry you can find in the voices of people all around you when you take the time to listen. Danny and Annie came back to the booth many times to tell their love story and read their love letters to each other. Danny brought all kinds of characters who he'd met over the course of his life to the booth: Major League umpire, undercover narcotics detective. He'd call the office every week and say, I had a cataract operation last week. Do you need me to come in and document it? And we'd say, sure, come on in, Danny. We couldn't get enough of him. And then a couple years ago, Danny was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and got sick very, very quickly. We ended up naming our first booth in Grand Central Terminal the Danny and Annie Parasa booth. And then the next week, Danny wanted to do a final interview. He was too sick to come to the booth. So StoryCorps went to his house in Bay Ridge to record a final interview with him and Annie. So this is Danny and Annie doing their final interview for StoryCorps and talking about his cancer. And this is track 7.
The illness is not hard on me. It's just, the finality of it. And him, he goes along like a trooper.
Listen. Even downhill, a car doesn't roll unless it's pushed, and you're giving me a great push. The deal of it is, we try to give each other hope, and not hope that I'll live, hope that she'll do well after I pass, hope that people will support her, hope that if she meets somebody and likes him, she marries him.
He has everything planned,
I'm working on it. She said it was her call. She wants to walk out behind the casket alone. I guess that's the way to do it, because when we were married, you know how your brother takes you down, your father takes you down? She said, well, I don't know which of my brothers to walk in with. I don't want to offend anybody. I said, I got a solution. I said, you walk in with me, you walk out with me. And the other day, I said, who's going to walk down the aisle with you behind the casket? To support her. And she said, nobody. I walked in with you alone. I'm walking out with you alone.
Mm-hmm.
There's a thing in life where you have to come to terms with dying. Well, I haven't come to terms with dying yet. I want to come to terms with being sure that you understand that my love for you up to this point was as much as it could be, and it'll be as much as it could be for eternity. I always said the only thing I have to give you is a poor gift, and it's myself. And I always gave it. And if there's a way to come back and give it, I'll do that too. Do you have the Valentine's Day letter there?
Yeah. My dearest wife, this is a very special day. It is a day on which we share our love, which still grows after all these years. Now that love is being used by us to sustain us through these hard times. All my love, all my days, and more. Happy Valentine's Day.
I could write on and on about her. She lights up the room in the morning when she tells me to put both hands on her shoulders so she can support me. She lights up my life when she says to me at night, wouldn't you like a little ice cream? Or would you please drink more water? I mean, those aren't very romantic things to say, but they stir my heart. In my mind, in my heart, there has never been, there is not now, and never will be another Annie.
That interview was recorded on a Thursday, and we broadcast it on NPR the following Friday, and Danny died about an hour after the broadcast on the radio. And Annie received about 2,000 condolence letters from public radio listeners, which she now reads one a day instead of the letter that she would have gotten from Danny. She buried a copy of the letters with Danny, and Danny was not someone who, walking down the street, you might peg as a great romantic. He was about 5 feet tall. He was bald. He had crossed eyes. He had one tooth, but had more romance in his little pinky than all of Hollywood's leading men put together. And also was someone who knew this city and the characters of this city and politics, as well as any of the pundits and experts, better than the pundits that you'd find on television, and as well as any of the kind of experts that you hear on television. Was just an extraordinary person. StoryCorps, I have so many stories here, and I usually am perfectly on time with stuff, but I could keep you here until like 3 in the morning if I kept according to plan, which I won't do. I'll play a couple more stories. So StoryCorps was this crazy idea. I had no idea what would happen when we opened this booth, and basically said, here's this booth in Grand Central Terminal. It's a free recording booth. You know, I didn't know if we'd have people coming in to record records or, you know, do Jerry Springer things and shoot people in the booth. I had no idea. I had all these fears about what would happen. But we've now done more than 20,000 interviews with 40,000 participants in booths all across the country. And I don't think anyone has gone awry, which speaks to both the talent of the facilitators, who is this kind of elite core of listeners who we hire to be in the booth, and also how seriously people take the project and how much it means to them. I think at its core, StoryCorps tells people that they matter and they won't be forgotten, which is all any of us really want to know. It was about a year after starting StoryCorps that I decided to give up my life as a documentary producer and devote the rest of my life to building this into a national institution that I hope will kind of help us become a nation of listeners and remind us that people who we might be afraid of or who might seem very distant from us. You know, we've been to, since we launched StoryCorps, we've been a national project for 3 years now, and we've recorded it with these mobile units that travel the country in all of the 48 lower states, and of course all 50 states with other forms of StoryCorps, and every kind of age, permutation of person that you can think of. And when you listen to these stories, I think that you recognize that there's so much more that we share as a country than divides us. And if we spent more time listening to each other and less time screaming at each other, we'd be a better country. So the idea is to help us become a nation of listeners and kind of start a revolution in listening and make StoryCorps accessible to everybody who wants to participate and make these stories ubiquitous so that we all have access to hear these stories of the people around us. I'm going to play a couple more and then maybe take a question or two and call it a night. This is a track from Florida, and it's two cousins who came to the booth, James Ransom and Cherie Johnson. And they came to StoryCorps. Did you facilitate this? Okay. They came to StoryCorps in Sarasota to remember a character. They grew up in Florida. Their grandmother lived in Bradenton, Florida. And they used to spend their summers in Bradenton, Florida. And they came to StoryCorps to remember a kind of formidable character from their youth, a woman named Lizzie Devine, who was their Sunday school teacher in Florida. So this is James Ransom and Cherie Johnson, track 9.
Let's talk about Miss Devine.
Lizzie Devine.
Miss Devine was a wiry lady. She wore summer dresses. She had a bandana and a straw hat. And she was the only person I knew that had more power than my grandmother.
She wasn't a mean person. She was stern.
Stern, yes, very stern.
You know, when she said something, she meant exactly what she said.
Right.
In fact, she was our Sunday school teacher. The only thing that would keep you from going to Sunday school, you had to have one foot on banana peel and the other in the grave.
Absolutely.
That's the only
There's
thing.
No excuse.
You had to go.
Had to go.
One of the things that you prayed for when you were in Miss Devine's class was, Lord, please let me get old enough to get out of this class.
This Miss Devine would come in on Sunday mornings to take us to Sunday school. And when I saw her come, Sherry, I thought the leaves would be blowing out the trees and the sky would go black and the clouds would come in. And she'd come in the house one morning and say, "Good morning, children." And everybody, my mother on down, said, "Good morning, Miss Devine." And she says, "It's time to go to Sunday school this morning, children." I said, "Miss Devine, I can't go to Sunday school today." She said, "No." I said, "No, ma'am." She says, "Why not?" She said, "Because I said my mother didn't bring enough clothes for me to go to Sunday school this morning." She said, "Oh, no." I said, "No, ma'am." She said, "What do you have? What kind of clothes do you have?" I said, "All I have, Miss Devine, are my pajamas and my tennis shoes." She said, "Well, that's okay, honey. Put your tennis shoes on. We go to Sunday school." I looked at my mother, and she looked away, Sherry. Miss Devine made me walk 2 blocks in my pajamas and my tennis shoes. I had to sit in church with my friends doing Sunday school in my pajamas and my tennis shoes. I would tell you, Sherry, I'll never lie again. But you know what? That's the kind of stuff that we got growing up, and I'll never forget that.
This first StoryCorps book came out last year called Listening is an Act of Love, and I actually spent endless months on the road on book tour. And the great thing about that was getting to meet almost everybody who was in the StoryCorps book. That Cherie and James were in the book and are great people, and actually gave me a picture of Ms. Devine, which I keep up on my on my wall in front of my desk, kind of staring down at me sternly and keeping me honest. I could take a few questions or play a story or two more. Any preference? All right, we'll do stories and forget questions. How about 2 more stories? Okay, I'm going to play one that is also in Listening is an Act of Love. And this is a story that it's kind of an extraordinary, to me, an extraordinary StoryCorps moment, because it speaks to a lot of what StoryCorps is about. Both that the microphone giving families a chance to talk about things they'd never talked about before, and the act of interviewing someone in your life, kind of illustrating, being an act that tells someone how much they mean to you. So this is an interview that was done in Los Angeles. George and Gina Kaywood. George Kaywood, his daughter is Gina. George is retired. And during the course of the interview, and you're not going to hear it in this clip, but basically George talks about his father. George's father committed suicide when George was 13, and George's father used George's gun to commit suicide. And they talk about it in the booth, and he says, you know, no one's ever asked me this before, and I've never talked about it before. So that's an illustration of the microphone kind of giving you the license to ask questions that you don't normally get to ask. And then, as you'll hear at the end of the interview, when you come to StoryCorps, we have on our website lists of questions and suggested questions, and many people use these questions. And we also suggest that at the end of the interview, you can turn the tables on the person you're interviewing and tell them, again, use the microphone to give you the opportunity to tell them what they mean to you. So I just like this interview. It's George and Gina Kaywood, and in this section of the interview, Gina is talking to George about his kind of crippling depression when she was a kid and what that was like for her. So George and Gina Kaywood, track 10. 10 or 11? Oh, maybe it's 11. Yes, thank you.
Dad, one of the most difficult times in my childhood, I think, was one of your most difficult times in your life, and that is when you went through a major depression. Can you tell me about what that was like?
Well, if you've ever been walking down the street, maybe at night, and a huge dog charges you, growling and barking, you know, that moment of utter panic and fear is like that 24 hours a day.
Our bedrooms shared a common wall, and I could hear at 5 in the morning you crying, just terrified to go to work and to take on another day.
Do you remember the poem you wrote me?
I do.
It was that will my dad ever stop crying?
Yes, it's like, can I have my dad back?
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
When I was going through it, I knew that there was this darkness that I'd been chasing off all my life, that I knew if I was going to be genuinely happy, which I wanted to be, I was going to have to face all that darkness.
And yet it's amazing. You were such a wonderful, loving father to us.
Certainly, it's the thing I've worked at hardest in my life. Even though I made a lot of mistakes with you and your 3 sisters, you have not breathed a breath, Gina, you and your sisters, when you weren't the most important thing in my life. I remember when you were born, looking at you, saying, I have no idea how to be your father. So my goal was, I wanted to be positive with you. I knew I was going to have to say no sometimes, but I wanted that to be against thousands of yeses in the hopes that you would grow up as positive as you actually are.
Sometimes when you did say no, I could bat my eyelashes at you and get you to change your mind. And
it still works. Each of the 4 girls had their own technique. You know, yours was those brown eyes.
Please, Dad.
Well, see, I'm melting on the spot. And, you know, Jill was just so everlastingly on my side that she was hard to resist because she was always working for my benefit. And Janelle, who turned out to be a very capable attorney, remembered everything I ever said. She would say, now, Dad, 4 years ago on this date, you said this, and now you're saying this. Don't you think you're being inconsistent? You know. And then Joanna, that she would grab my face between her hands and turn me to look at her because she sort of said, my dad is an understanding person. He's reasonably bright. If I can just get him to see the truth, he'll surely let me do what I want. And the 4 of you together, you know, I knew I was whipped.
You know, I think one of the things that my sisters and I have always felt is that you are a great, great man. And I hope that somehow this interview today brings you the honor that I think you deserve.
I wouldn't trade this for every accolade in the whole world. You know, I love you, honey.
I love you too.
One of the StoryCorps is really about giving families the opportunity and people the opportunity to talk to each other in the booth. But I think one of the things that's going to come out of this very simple project is a very important and rich kind of history of this country in the 20th and 21st century. History as you know, the great Studs Terkel, who's a hero of mine, will often say is usually told from the top down, and StoryCorps is creating a bottom-up history through our voices and hearts and stories. Taylor and Bessie Rogers came to StoryCorps a couple of years ago. Taylor Rogers was one of 1,300 sanitation workers who went on strike in Memphis, as everybody knows from the anniversary that just passed, and was with Martin Luther King at his last speech the night before he was assassinated. He was with Dr. King at Mason Temple on April 3rd, 1968. And Taylor, who ended up working as a sanitation worker for many, many years after that, came to StoryCorps with his wife Bessie to remember that night with Dr. King, that final night with Dr. King. So this is Taylor Rogers and Bessie Rogers at StoryCorps in Memphis, and that's track 11.
I mean, it was wall to wall with people.
And it was storming and raining. He preached, and he said that
I've been to the mountaintop.
Oh, yeah.
Because I've been to the mountaintop. And I looked over and I've seen the promised land.
And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land.
I might not get there with you.
I may not get there with you.
But we will get there.
But I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
And he was crying. Tears were rolling down his cheek.
Preachers were crying, people were crying, and everybody was crying. And
he really talked that night. I mean, he really, really talked.
You could tell by the expression on his face and the feeling and the sound of his voice that he knew something was going to happen. He said, because I'm not fearing any man.
I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Next day, he was killed.
You know, it's kind of like you lost a part of your family. You just really can't describe it. He stopped everything, put everything aside to come to Memphis to see about the people on the bottom of the ladder, the sanitation workers. After his death, we marched. You couldn't hear a sound. You couldn't hear nothing but leather against pavement. It was just some terrible days back then, but with God's help, we came through. And it means something to know that you was a part of this.
Part of what we've done with StoryCorps over the last couple of years is launch a series of special initiatives. I'll play one more story. The first special initiative we launched was with the September 11th Memorial Museum to give everyone who lost a loved one on September 11th the chance to come into StoryCorps and remember that person and create a memorial for that person. We launched an initiative with families who have a loved one with Alzheimer's disease, which became a national project last year. And we also have a project which was launched a year ago, which was launched last year, about a year and a half ago, called the Griot Initiative, which is, Griot is a West African word for storyteller, and is an African-American oral history project that traveled the country. And actually this month, we surpassed the slave narratives, which were recorded as part of the WPA. There were 2,300 slave narratives, most of them written, and we passed the slave narratives as the largest African-American oral history collection. And I want to play a story from our Griot initiative. This was recorded in the first month of Griot in Atlanta. Did Lynn Weaver? Oh, okay, all right. Lynn Weaver came to StoryCorps with his daughter, Kimberly, to talk about growing up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and to pay tribute to his father, who was a janitor and a chauffeur in Knoxville. So this is Lynn Weaver talking about his dad, whose name was Thurman Weaver, as part of the Griot initiative. That's track 13.
My father was everything to me, and it's actually kind of difficult talking about him without becoming very emotional. Up until, he died, every decision I made, I'd always call him. And he would never tell me what to do, but he would always listen and say, well, what do you want to do? And he made me feel that I could do anything that I wanted to do. I can remember when we integrated to schools that there were many times when I was just scared. And I didn't think that I would survive. And I'd look up and he'd be there. And whenever I saw him, I knew that I was safe. You know, I always tell you that your mama is the smartest person I've ever met. But I think my father ranks right up there as brilliant. When I was in high school, I was taking algebra, and I was sitting at the kitchen table trying to do my homework. And I got frustrated, said, I just can't figure this out. So my father said, what's the problem? He came by. He said, what's the problem? And I said, that's just algebra. And he said, well, let me look at it. I said, Dad, they didn't even have algebra in your day. And I went to sleep. And around 4 o'clock that morning, he woke me up. He said, come on, son, get up. He set me at the kitchen table, and he taught me algebra. What he had done is sit up all night and read the algebra book. And then he explained the problems to me so I could do them and understand them. And to this day, I live my life trying to be half the man my father was, just half the man. And I would be a success if my children loved me half as much as I love my father.
I met Lynn Weaver at an event in Atlanta. We had the booth at the Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta, and we had a celebration at the end of the first month of GRIO where a lot of the families who participated came and we played the stories. And I got this email from Lynn Weaver the day after the playing of his dad's story at that event. It says, "You'll never know how honored and touched I was by the playing of the remembrance of my dad. After I got home, I realized that the evening of the StoryCorps GRIO reception was the anniversary of my father's death. Even in death, he continues to embrace me with his love. Your words and actions have touched me more than you'll ever know." Signed, Lynn Weaver, Chairman of Surgery, Morehouse School of Medicine, Atlanta, Georgia. So, you know, I think these are the real American stories. You know, if you watch cable TV or read some of the newspapers, you'd assume that we're kind of a nation of internet sex predators and the spoiled children of billionaires. But it's these stories of compassion and courage and just everyday people getting through life that, I mean, they're just stories I like, and I think that they're the stories that remind us how lucky we are to be alive. And as you guys go off on your journey through school and then into the world to really, you know, this is the elite of the elite here, and you will be among the most important and listened to journalists in the country. I hope you remember some of the things we talked about earlier. You know, don't be an asshole is a good is a good one to remember, and be honest with people, and also take risks. If you and make sure that you're, if you can, fight hard to do stories you care about and projects you love. You know, it's not the easiest way to go, but it is definitely the most rewarding way. It's been a really amazing and wild and beautiful ride, and also just having the privilege to kind of hear these stories and share these stories and work with incredible people like Jonah and all the people who work at StoryCorps now is just a privilege and a joy, and I hope that you all can find similarly amazing paths as you go through your lives. I know you will. You just got to keep fighting for it. Never take no for an answer. So I am ending exactly on the second, perfect timing, but unfortunately no time for questions. I just thank you for listening tonight. And thank you.